Oi, oi, hello and welcome to another GG.CO.UK video, and in this episode we'll be talking about a recent hot topic. It's pacemakers. What's the point of them? Why are they in the races? Should they be allowed to race? And I'm going to talk about some examples where we've had some shocks. There's been some recent examples of that, hence why it is a hot topic at the moment, but maybe some examples of when it's worked out well. Now, I'm going to keep this as concise as I possibly can. Lots of the information in here is my opinion, but there will be some results-based stats in here too. So where I talk about those stats, I'm talking about horses that have been pacemakers, basically not stats, I'm talking about facts. Now, horse racing at the highest level is a game of fine margins. I feel like the higher you get up in any sporting event, right into the top tier, the 1%, they still matter, but it's even the 0.5s or the 0.25% that can make the difference between winning or losing. Now, in horse racing, there are a number of variables that you cannot control. You can't control the ground, you can't control the runners in the field, but you can control some elements of them. You can do what you need to do at home in terms of training. You can get a horse ready for the day. And on that day, it may be the case that you decide that a pacemaker is required. Now, the role of a pacemaker is quite simple. It's in the race to enhance the chance of another particular runner in the race, but ultimately it is in there to set a tempo that means the best horse in the race will win. Now, in theory, if you have a pacemaker, they're likely to be a stablemate or an owner mate, or they could be a stable and owner mate. So what I mean by that is stablemate, they're trained by the same trainer. We know that. An owner mate, they're owned by the same owner. Sometimes you might have both of those. There may be a horse that's owned by the same owner with the same trainer. But ultimately, and like I say, in theory, they're there to set the pace of a race, to keep it nice and balanced, nice and fast, so that the best horse turns out on top. And in theory, the best horse is the horse that they're setting it up for. So the horse that they're in there to make the pace for. Of course, it doesn't always work out like that. If it was as simple as, well, there's a pacemaker in the race, so if they're in there, it means the horse they're setting the pace for will definitely win. It's not quite how it pans out. But tactically, it can be used to horses' advantage. We've seen examples of that over the years, which I'm going to talk about in this video. Now, I think that Qirat's victory in the Sussex Stakes at 150 to 1 shone a negative light on pacemakers in there. People would obviously have said, well, why have they let him go so far clear? And I guess that's an element within pacemaking that needs to be talked about too, right? The horse that's going out in front to make the pace, sometimes they'll do it on their own. In Qirat's example, there was a few of the horses that went clear. Now, there are some horses that will get lit up and they need to go against, or they need to go with another horse. But ultimately, the jockeys that are in behind have got to manage the fractions as much as the horses in front have too. We saw a very close example in the Juddmonte where Birr Castle traded as short as 2 to 1 in the Juddmonte International, where Ombudsman was a very ready winner in the end. But you saw them after the line celebrating. You saw interviews after by the trainers and the jockeys basically saying that it was a bit of a relief that they didn't win the race because they were there to do a job for owner mate Ombudsman. And I guess at that point, that's where it brings an ethical question in there. And are they even obliging by the BHA rules by trying to obtain the best position in a race? We'll come on to that shortly, but I'm going to talk about a few recent examples. Well, I say some recent examples. They do go back quite a way as well, but I'll talk about some, in my lifetime, examples I can think of horses where they're not the only scares and shocks we've seen recently, Qirat and Birr Castle, but there's some pacemakers or perceived pacemakers that have been winning big races over the years. Typically tends to be over further distances because that's where you would need an even tempo. In your shorter sprint races, it's going to be fair, even and balanced, and a lot more comes down to the breaks and stuff. But sort of in no particular order, you can think about Sovereign that won the Irish Derby at 33 to 1, a perceived pacemaker for the rest of Ballydoyle. Serpentine, similar type again, in the Derby at 25 to 1, went out in front and was rushed to the front to do so. Won at a big price. There's horses, a couple of examples from the QE2. Maroof won at 66 to 1, Summoner won at 33 to 1. They were in those races to set the race up for another horse. Cape Cross in the Lock-Inge at 20 to 1. Audience is a recent one in the Lock-Inge at 22 to 1. Was supposed to be in the race to set the race up for Inspiral, I think it was. Audience was subject to a little bit of money before them. But, you know, there are horses in recent examples where just because they're not the 151 of Qirat, they're still in there to do a job. But, you know, a horse potentially has a chance in the race. Another one I can remember from a while back is Windsor Palace in the Moorsbridge Stakes. That was a 66 to 1 shot. Another pacemaker that went into the race, that went in, actually won the race at big prices. So look, They are, I guess, a handful of examples where it hasn't quite played out to add to what's happened with Qirat and Birr Castle in the recent examples. But it does work out, I guess, in the majority of cases. I've not done the figures to run in there to see what they are, but ultimately the pacemaker is setting up the job of making the best horse in the race win. That's where I'm saying it works out in the majority of cases, not that the horse that they're actually setting the pace for goes and wins the race. It might sound outrageous to use this as an example, but the best example I can give you guys is Frankel. Yes, Frankel, like literally the greatest flat race horse that's, I mean, definitely in my lifetime, but probably been around. He's got to be in the top 10 or the top 5 of horses that have ever lived. He had a pacemaker in his last, I think it was 7 or 8 races. It was actually his half-brother, his elder half-brother, Bullet Train, that did that job, also trained by Sir Henry Cecil. But that horse was simply employed as a pacemaker. He went out like the clappers, or sometimes he wouldn't even be able to go that fast because Frankel was keen enough, but he was there to make sure there was enough of a tempo. I think in one of the races, the first time he did it in the QE2 in 2011, I think it would have been, he went miles clear. And we know how good Frankel is at horse. We know when Frankel was clear at the bushes in the Guineas. We've seen him time after time. He doesn't, you think, need a pacemaker, but he is an absolute weapon of a horse, Frankel. It's just a reminder that Bullet Train was there in every single one of those last 7 or 8 races. And I'm not saying that Frankel only won those races because of Bullet Point. Of course he didn't. He was a phenomenal horse. But would the results possibly have been different had Frankel not had a pacemaker in the race? We don't know. I would argue no, because Frankel's an absolute beast. But the horse was there to do a job. They felt the need to do that. So it's a I guess a bit of a quandary in the fact of, again, I'll spin back to the ethical part of it, and I guess there's the questions that could be asked of maybe why or it is or it isn't a good idea. So I guess the questions you could ask there is it an unfair advantage for someone to be able to do it? Well, potentially. Owners and trainers have to have the talent. As I said, you can't be setting up a Group 1 as a pacemaker if you haven't got a horse that can run a fast enough pace at that period. So I guess bigger owners, bigger trainers would have more opportunities to be able to do that. Should they be in the betting is another answer to have in there. I mean, in America, they do have some horses. I think if they're in the same ownership, or I can't remember what it was, but I used to remember seeing lots of coupled horses over there. Is that an option that should be happening with these pacemakers? That if they're in there to set up for another race, you just get a freebie if the pacemaker does flukily go and win the race? I mean, there's an argument that no, because you could just back both of them. But at the same time, maybe the people that don't understand horse racing as much should maybe have that benefit. But then I guess when you've got horses in the same ownership, how do you define if they definitely are a pacemaker or not? Which I guess takes us across to another question that you've got to ask as well. Are they really trying to achieve their best chance in placement and best race finish? That's sort of BHA guidelines, isn't it? That you're always supposed to be riding your horse with the best chance of achieving the highest possible finish. If you were to identify as a pacemaker, I think you should be removed from the betting, and I think you shouldn't be allowed to win the race. If you did by fluke or crook or whatever it was, then maybe it comes out. But it's a quandary that I don't really know how to solve the answer for it. Another probable question you could ask yourself is, are they being pushed to an extreme that they shouldn't have to be pushed to? So what I mean by that is they're being put into a level of competition that is beyond their capabilities. They're known to not be good enough to run to that standard, but in these instances, we know they're fast enough to carry horses to a certain period. You're probably asking there that you're going to have a horse that's got no business being in the race from a win perspective, that's having to push itself to a limit to set it up for another horse. I think it's personally, from my perspective on there, fine in the fact that the horses love what they're doing. If they're getting to go out and they're getting to run, yes, it is about winning from a betting perspective or an achievements perspective, but just like in life, it's not all about winning in there. There are good things that can be done, and I'm sure a lot of these horses, especially in the Bullet Train Frankel thing, maybe I'm being a little bit romantic with this, but like, it was his big brother that was helping him go and do that, and I'm sure he's happy to have been a part of that with him. I think it is a positive side, if we could spin to it, that do they simply allow the races to unfold to see the best horses win? Like, I know we get some of these shocks in there. You could argue that on the day, those horses are the best horses because they've managed to sustain a gallop that no one else thought they could. But potentially it is a positive in that aspect that they set that gallop to make sure that tactically we don't have any bad, dodgy results that we could rue after, which should be helpful as a punter, I suppose. They do allow horses to enjoy that vital role. Like I talked about, it's not just about winning in horse racing, and they doing what they love. They get to go to those big occasions, the big days. And obviously they've been bought for a reason for those owners, and especially with the trainers too. They're not going to be putting a horse into a situation that isn't safe or comfortable for them. And I think they're probably having a lovely time out in front, setting those fractures up, especially like Birr Castle, that's been a long time away from the winners' enclosure, who nearly burgled £750,000 in the Juddmonte. Like, who wouldn't want the opportunity to try and do that if you know underneath they've got a bit of ability? And I think as well, they're also helping to shape history by letting these races unfold as they do, but also providing talking points for generations to come. You can go back centuries if you Google about pacemakers and things that have happened. They talk about derbies, and they'll talk about lots of stuff in America about big races over there where they've got pacemakers. Sometimes they might have 2 or 3 pacemakers where a horse will set the fraction to begin with, but goes so fast another horse takes over halfway. Sometimes I would say this is unethical, that they will have multiple runners in that potentially can cause congestion to other horses in behind. There's a whole different sphere of racing that's on the other side of the seas. But talking about it on this side, I do think that, like I say, the Frankel example is the best one for me to use from recent years, because Bullet Train, being the big brother, helped him shape history. Sorry. So like I say, whatever I think your opinion is on pacemakers, they are a piece of the puzzle for us to unfold as bettors. And as fans of the sport, we can't predict the future of any outcome, and we can't guarantee accuracy with what we're predicting in there. We can never really guarantee that a horse is simply there to be beaten too. So we can't necessarily pigeonhole all these horses as pacemakers. Ultimately, any horse in a race against Frankel you could class as a pacemaker, owner mate, stablemate or not, because let's be honest, none of them were ever going to beat him. Tricky subject, I guess, to talk about without conversing with you guys. So if there's anything you want to talk about in the comments, this is maybe something we can revisit. I'd be interested to know your thoughts on there, your opinions on pacemakers, especially from a betting perspective, maybe even from that ethical perspective too. Ultimately, we do kind of know, or we can assume that they're pacemakers, but maybe something should be identified and make it very clear if a horse is in there to do a job. Even if they were, though, doesn't mean they haven't got a chance of winning the race. Again, it's our opinion and it's our responsibility to whittle that stuff down. So make sure you're dropping a like on these videos if you do like the videos. Make sure you subscribe to the GG channel, because why wouldn't you be? And like I say, drop a comment below to start a bit of a debate on this one if you'd like to do so. We'll see you again very soon.